Kérem, fogadják nagy szeretettel a következő előadónkat, dr. Darla Castellit, aki az Amerikai Egyesült Államok Texas államának egyeteméről a kineziológiai és egészségügyi tanszéknek a professzor asszonya, és a minőségi testnevelés az Amerikai Egyesült Államokban a múlt és jövő irányairól tart majd nekünk egy előadás. Ms. Castelli, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you so much for your invitation to this wonderful venue and this fantastic event in an amazing city. I am thankful for your endorsement and invitation from the Hungarian Sports Federation, as well as the support from the Cooper Institute. I am from the University of Texas at Austin, and I am a professor currently, but in my tenure, I have actually been a physical education teacher, a principal or an administrator within a school. I have also been a summer camp counselor, a coach, a director of a sports camp, a researcher, and today a scholar. One of these days I'm going to get a job and just hold on to it, but I think I found it at the University of Texas at Austin. So I bring multiple lenses and perspectives, and my charge today is to really talk about the past and the future directions of quality physical education in the United States. In the overview, I'd like to set the tone. I'd spend a few minutes responding to these particular questions on the three different parts. How has physical training during physical education been used to improve or refine our skill and health-related fitness? And we'll talk about past practices in physical education. The second part is what is quality physical education? And what you may see in this historical perspective is that history may repeat itself. And in the final part, there's lots of acronyms there, and I'd like to talk about multiple initiatives that are going on in the United States as potential seeds that we could plant for your initiatives going on here and throughout the European Union. I think many of the terms you're familiar with, but as I suggested, I have a slightly different lens. The bottom term I would like to bring to your attention that sport in the United States is slightly different interpretation than quite often what we see in the European Union. Sports at about ages 10, 11, and 12 become only offered to gifted and talented individuals, those who are pursuing a high level of sport competition, where it's a time where many of our young people drop out of sport, and without an affluent or an advocate as a parent, they are unlikely to continue to pursue sport in some way, shape, or form. Sport is part of our school system, but again, it usually focuses on the elite, which is a slightly different interpretation than we have here in the European Union. Historically, physical education has been influenced by German gymnastics and certainly the Swedish notion of exercise for health. Initially, it was rooted within medicine, and it was very regimented physical training, where we would all line up and do calisthenics, and you can see some of the pictures here. Some of these images actually came from the University of Illinois at Freer Hall, where I have spent some time as a scholar. But in the 1800s, it became rooted within the school system, and we thought of it as physical education being important in the preparation of our youth, and it almost took a prevention slant. I've read that Horace Mann, the first superintendent of schools in Massachusetts, actually rode on horseback from school to school to confirm that there was actually physical education and a place for children to play. It wasn't the formalized physical education that we know now, but at least there would be an opportunity for children to play. Throughout the course of history, there have been different initiatives that have been emerged. So post-World War II with Dwight Eisenhower, and then moving forward into John F. Kennedy, several initiatives such as this notion of, within the media, in Sport Illustrated, it said that America was getting soft. And then certainly that fitness post-World War II was an issue. And so the United States, and particularly President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, established the Council on Physical Fitness, and then the President's Council on Physical Fitness Sports, and that we have evolved from there. If you want to read or you want to listen to President Kennedy's speech, and where he's urging individuals to offer fitness guidelines and physical activity for children, exercise opportunities within schools, the webcast is there, and you could view that on your own time. But after this movement of physical fitness, there was one of movement education, where we actually stepped back and rethought how we introduce the concept of motor skills and movement concepts. Within that initiative, we found that through Le Bon techniques, we would question children to, how do you put weight on your hands? How many different ways can you roll with your body? And it was almost a counter response to this notion that health-related fitness was important and a movement away from skill-related fitness to focus on motor skills. We also, during this time period, defined the 3 domains of the physical, the affective, and cognitive domains, and we thought of physical education as of the physical through the physical. But with every trend, we quickly moved away from that into a standards-based reform education in about the 1980s. And this actually stems from a report in 1983 and a commissioned investigation that identified physical education as a frill, as an extra, that it was not needed among our children, and that we should place our resources in other places like math and science. And so in the emergence of all of this, we decided to define who we are with standardized outcomes, but it put us at a real critical crossroads and a pivotal time of how does physical education relate to public health, and we had to answer these questions simultaneously while identifying specific learning outcomes that would be achieved during the experience of physical education. It wasn't until 1990 that we had our first national physical education standards, and in 1995 we had the first standards. In 92 we were in the critical crossroads of trying to identify what are the desirable outcomes when a child experiences physical education. Those outcomes have since been revised in 2004, and then as you hear later in the presentation, we have the emergence of a new term within those national standards, and that's physical literacy. Obesity and inactivity are a global issue. In the United States, we have fast, hard facts that obesity has actually doubled in some of our populations in the last 30 years and quadrupled in others. Over 1/3 of our children, youth, adolescents have been identified as overweight or obese. And let's see if I can actually... The bottom state there, number 16, if you can see it, the large one, is actually Texas, where we are located, and within the state of Texas, we have a unique situation. I'm about 3 hours south of the Cooper Institute, and we have approximately more than 1/3 of our children are actually overweight or obese, and it is projected by the year 2020 that 1 in 4 of our children in this diverse population in Texas, where we have a large Hispanic population, that we'll actually have 1 in 4 who will be diagnosed with diabetes, a completely preventable disease, but given our obesity, given our diets, and given our physical inactivity, will likely impact our children. But it's not just the United States that is experiencing this. As Nike has reported, and their particular Design to Move report, we actually have Brazil, China, and India displayed on this particular slide, where the graph shows the decline in physical activity across those nations as well. Brazil in particular, I was speaking with some of the scholars, the introduction of cable television has actually, that in and of itself, has resulted in major declines in physical activity. and certainly obesity. Obesity as a health issue costs money. It has global impact, international economic impact, and within that impact, I'd love to do the same thing that we're hearing here today with the Hungarian Sports Federation and the European Union, is take some of these healthcare monies and then slide them over into the prevention, utilizing prevention strategies such as quality physical education and providing regular physical activity programming beyond the school day. In the United States, many children, the only chance or opportunity they have to be physically active is their chance at school. They live in a circumstance where they cannot get transportation to the park. They do not have a financial situation where they can play to participate in sport. And yet, only 27% of our high school students actually meet the recommendation of 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity each day. And only 6% of our schools in the United States offer daily physical education. What happens in our offerings in physical education is quite often it may be that they have daily physical education for all of ninth grade or when they are 14 years old, and then there is no physical education offered the next 3 years in their secondary experience. And so quite often, it's difficult for us to establish habitual physical activity engagement when we don't have physical education on a regular basis within the schools. And even more bad news in some way, shape, or form is the notion of our annual report called Shape of the Nation. And Shape of the Nation identifies the number of states that potentially have waivers from the mandates that we create for physical education. Create these opportunities for children to be active, to experience formalized instruction in physical education, and yet there are some policies or loopholes within those policies that ultimately children waive out of, or school districts do not have to actually offer these types of programming, don't have to have certified teachers. Perhaps there's no curriculum in place. So there are some limitations in the subsequent slides here, identify specific limitations to some of our programming and policies that we already have in place. 28 states will allow exemptions or waivers. So even though there is a state mandate to provide physical education, a school district may argue that we do not have the facilities, we do not have the resources, we do not have the quality teachers to then provide that physical education. Sometimes 22 states are really not specific about specific enough in these policies, or there's not enough strength to the policy. The policy may be very ambiguously worded and suggest that you have to have physical education. But as a school or a school district, you decide how you are going to deliver physical education. And only 10 states specifically have funding allocated to professional development for teachers. And as you'll see in the multiple initiatives the new initiatives that we are currently introducing, becomes really important to train our future teachers as well as current teachers on some of these progressive strategies. And yet few teachers are afforded that opportunity. Only 6 states actually require physical education in every grade. Only 3 states meet the mandate, whether that mandate is at the elementary or at the secondary level of 150 minutes or 225 minutes. However, it's not all doom and gloom. This is, as you have expressed, the time to act. And there are several teachers in school districts who are doing exemplary work in their efforts and their initiatives to meet the needs of this emerging population. And so one of the concepts that has kind of bubbled to the top, so to speak, is this notion of physical education teachers not just having a role as an effective teacher within the school, but also overseeing all physical activity opportunities across the school day as a director of physical activity. So before school and after school programming could be an initiative, a walking school bus where the children walk to school. It could be brain breaks or some physical activity within the school day, and I'll speak more on that in a moment. Fuel up to play 60 when you have the backing of major entities such as the National Football League, Reebok, and others have taken charge on making this notion of play and playing for 60 minutes really important. They have provided many resources for our teachers to be trained. They've provided equipment and grant and funding opportunities for teachers to overcome potential barriers that they face. The CISPAP is a comprehensive school physical activity program where you actually think of physical activity the immediate moment that children arrive to school or their transportation to school and into the evening at those particular facilities, or into the evening where you have family fun nights or you open up the playground for children to play. In many regions of the United States, schools are surrounded by a chain link fence. That fence is locked, and communities who pay taxes to support that particular facilities are not offered access in the evening for their children to play on the playground. We also have initiatives where we have guidelines for Americans and several documents. President Obama's wife, First Lady Michelle Obama, her initiative, Let's Move, has really generated quite a bit of momentum with this idea and brought quite a bit of media attention to the notion that we should have active schools, we should have active communities, and that it is about physical activity as well as healthy eating. So that brings you through a historical perspective of where we began with physical training and some of the initiatives that we have ongoing today. What is this notion of quality physical education? Formerly called the National Association for Sport and Physical Education, which is now entitled SHAPE America. To develop quality physical education is really focused on the development of skills, knowledge, and dispositions among young people within our schools. And how that transpires is we provide opportunities for them to learn. So we have the important student-teacher ratio of students. We have a proportional class size where learning can be optimized. We have equipment for each child within that classroom. You don't have to stand and wait in line. There are no games of elimination. There is smooth transitions and a classroom that is very well managed that focuses on pedagogical strategies to help those children learn. Timely, corrective, congruent feedback is also part of this notion of opportunities to learn. Our content must also be meaningful and relevant. It has to be developmentally appropriate. What is appropriate for an 8-year-old is very different for what's appropriate for a 13-year-old. Making those developmental adaptations based upon the student's interest, based upon their needs, based upon their current developmental status, that would qualify as being quality physical education. Pedagogical practices need to vary by the content that you introduce. Sometimes it is more direct and teacher-centered in the delivery, while other times it is more student-centered in our approach. A qualified, highly qualified physical education teacher understands the distinction, can make the distinction between both, and understands when to apply teacher-centered versus student-centered practice. One example might be in gymnastics, where at first we allow a child to explore things that they can do with their own body, taking weights on their hands, see if they can roll on their bodies in different ways, and then with feedback and through experiential learning, move that child through a series of learning experiences. where they master a particular task. And the last part is this notion of assessment of our learning standards, and some confirmation of tracking and monitoring our progress that our students make. How do we know where they're going if we don't assess? If we don't track them from their baseline, has learning even really taken place? Quality physical education is a comprehensive approach, not where in the moments we look at skills, then we look at knowledge and disposition. They're all integrated and interrelated. Physical activity is highly emergent within each one of the lessons, and we accomplish things, we try to impose ideas that help children have the skills, knowledge, and ability to be active for the remainder of their lives. We hope that we can maximize the potential of each individual child by integrating technology, and if we have done our jobs as physical educators and we have quality physical education programs, we create this demand where the students expect that to happen as they rise from school to school through their educational experiences, and we hope that we create a demand among the parents that actually suggests that most parents are supportive of physical education, but they think of the physical education that they may have had historically that was regimented physical training. And we have moved beyond that, and we need to create a demand among our parents to say that this is appropriate and it's the needs of our students. We also understand that there are some appropriate and inappropriate practices. For example, the notion of being individual and team sport oriented. There is a place for sport in our physical education curriculum, but perhaps an overemphasis of the sport might be an inappropriate practice if that's the only type of content that our students are exposed to. We need to make sure that our grading practices are actually appropriate and that we are not using the fitness scores to grade students per se, but we are using the FitnessGram's test scores for educational purposes to gain a better understanding of who they are and what goals they should set to lead a physically active and healthy life. I think one of the expectations that have really evolved in this notion of appropriate practices is our bottom two bullets here. And to identify, it's become the responsibility of the physical education teacher to identify places within the community that beyond physical education, where can a child be active? Where can they be active with their families? And making connections to sport outcomes or outlets, recreation programs, hiking trails, local swimming pools, and places where they can be active. This was not necessarily the case when I began teaching, that I had to point those things out in the community. We already had a village, and the village was raising the child, and children could play in the streets, and it was safe to do that. That's not necessarily the case across the United States, and so it has become the physical educator's responsibility to point out those opportunities and create a chance for children to take advantage of those places and locations. There are three primary future directions which I'd like to focus on. I have been involved in all three of the initiatives from very different perspectives. The Comprehensive School Physical Activity Program, again, is physical activity across the school day, and I will elaborate on that in a moment. The Presidential Youth Fitness Program has been taken, and I'll elaborate on the details in a moment, but has really taken this place where since 2012 and the adoption of the FitnessGram, has moved forward in its initiative in providing fitness assessment, professional development, and recognition for the achievements of our children in schools. And then this notion of physical literacy. Our national standards have moved away from the identification of a physically active lifestyle, but having a physically literate individual. And some of these things are just emerging. On the bottom of your screen, you see several Institute of Medicine reports a report from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. These initiatives have really helped to provide guidance to our physical education teachers, as well as those who are administrators of those particular programs. And in particular, on the left-hand column, bottom left there, Educating the Student Body is an IOM report that I was part of, and it really takes the perspective that we need to take a whole of school approach, and that physical education should be a core subject. So I think we've come around, and I think we're making some incredible advances in the recommendations. Let me explain each one of these initiatives in detail for you, and then I will sum up the findings. The Comprehensive School Physical Activity Program model, as you can see, is the minute a child comes to campus, comes to the school grounds, we are thinking in terms of taking our content as physical educators back out into the general classroom, into getting recess back. We have taken such an academic focus since the 1980s and our desire to achieve those learning outcomes that we have eliminated things like recess. We have eliminated opportunities for children to be physically active across the school day. This model brings that back, but it asks for the physical education teacher to take initiative. It's not solely their responsibility, but they take initiative for beginning to make some of these connections across the school day. Now, when we started on the model, we were hoping that the top physical education bubble would actually be a star. But in the process of negotiation, we lost a little bit of the star. Physical education is the star and the centerpiece. It's where formalized instruction takes place, and the other venues provide opportunities for practice and engagement. And so that's how we're taking the content. We are not eliminating physical education in any way, shape, or form. We are suggesting that physical education is the focal point. The terms have evolved to now it's the physical activity leader, opposed to the director of physical activity. And these are some of our early findings in our initial work. So if we take each one of these components, the first 4 columns there represent the during the school day. It could be physical activity breaks. It could be academic content while children are moving and learning. It could also be the opportunity of recess. What we see in the first 2 bars is our treatment group. The second 2 bars is our control. Then we have before and after school programming. And the next 4 columns, we have family and community engagement, followed by opportunities for staff and in staff involvement, which could be the wellness of our teachers, or it could also be the fact that other generalists are introducing our content. And we see significant results in all of our treatment. We trained over 500 physical education teachers, and then we asked them to go back to their schools with our support online and through interactive webinar boosters for an entire year, and we see these dramatic changes. So teachers are willing and ready to take on the new responsibilities of rethinking the school day, of bringing physical activity across the school day. Teachers had the knowledge and the capability to do so. They were very eager to receive additional training and professional development, and we're thankful for those particular opportunities. Specifically, they felt more confident and efficacious after they participated in these professional development opportunities, particularly when talking to parents and trying to counsel families about fitness education and the interpretation of the fitness grant. So professional development provided these particular outlets. Those teachers who participated in the professional development offered more opportunities at their school to be physically active. Teachers also felt that this was their responsibility to do so. Many of the teachers that we actually worked with in our training were already taking on some of these initiatives. It didn't require professional development or our intervention for them to do so. they were already offering a bike or walk to school program. They were already offering a runner's club, intramural activities after school, and so our professional development just extended their efforts. And for an extended version of some of these results, the Journal of Teaching and Physical Education in the October issue will have 7 different empirically based research studies about this initiative of the CISPAP, or the Comprehensive School Physical Activity Programs. I serve as an external evaluator for the Presidential Youth Fitness Program. It is a unique stance, and in some ways I am in conflict in this presentation, although we all want to see the best for our students. And so I'm going to present you with a little bit of a teaser here about some of the things that we have done and accomplished within our evaluation. And since, as I suggested in April of 2012, the Presidential Youth Fitness Program adopted the FitnessGram as the national method for fitness assessment. Prior to that, we had the President's Council, we had FitnessGram. We also were certainly familiar with some of the European models with regard to fitness assessment. There are 3 core areas within this program. It has to do with professional development, the use of the FitnessGram and integration, as well as student recognition. In the first year cohort in this initiative, 500 schools were offered a funding program to receive resources and training to get this initiative up and running at their school. The sample was divided in who received an in-person training, a workshop, or who received the virtual training package. The virtual training package had several online modules for the teachers to complete at their convenience. They could go back and watch the materials again and repeat that. We had a very representative sample with 48 of the 50 states and 242 different school districts that were represented. Most of these teachers had experienced fitness assessment before, but not all of them, about half of them had used the FitnessGram. These were our data sources, and the image that you see here on the screen was an example of the login site that the teachers actually got to interact with and experience. Particularly Units 4 and Units 5, out of the first course that they experienced, it was about this notion of how you promote an active lifestyle and how you engage the parents and the community. And teachers, those particular units really resonated with the teachers. I'm going to identify some of the initial facilitators and barriers, but unfortunately I cannot elaborate on the rest of our findings because they are being released in a CDC webinar on Monday, September 29th. And I apologize for the little bit of a teaser, but please join us on the webinar for the release of the remainder of our findings. Certainly, these opportunities for funding and professional development, the provision of resources allowed teachers to integrate and begin their workings on fitness education, going well beyond the notion of just simply fitness testing. Supportive administrators facilitated this process and helped teachers have additional time to work on this, so they had release time to either administer the test, learn how to administer the assessment process. They had school-wide awards assemblies to recognize the performance, the fitness performance of some of the students. And the students and the teachers both recalled that this was very valuable and exciting for their schools because this was the initial opportunity that they were finally on par with other academic subjects. So we go back to the recommendation by IOM is that physical education become a core subject. In this particular case, the recognition mechanism allowed many of these schools to finally be on par with those academic subjects. And certainly there, within any first year of the program, the notion of communication and the technology, particularly at some of the rural schools, some of the private schools, we're still working through some of those issues. And finally, this notion of physical literacy. We continue to be influenced by the European nation, and particularly the work by Margaret Whitehead in England. And certainly we are influenced by our friendly neighbors to the north in Canada and the work of Marc Tremblay and his particular initiative. Physical literacy is this notion of it is a desirable outcome of physical education where the individual embodies a physically active life. They embrace it and they perform in that physically active life. This would allow us to maximize our potential of each individual student and be much more student-centered in our approach. The hope is that it leads to greater mastery in skills, knowledge, and abilities, so the individuals can take away these skills and engage in that lifetime. The expectation is for everyone, every child, to live a healthy lifestyle. How does this fit into the current context of the standards that we have in place? Well, if we think about leading a physical active life, the refinement of motor skills, certainly all of these things, for someone to be motorically competent would be someone who is physically literate. It takes the notion of physical education plus health literacy and it merges them together. Although this initiative is not necessarily without controversy, I don't think that we have received consensus yet in the United States that this is fully embracing it, such as Canada has already fully embraced this, that this is the direction that we want to go, but we are currently working through that and coming to an understanding of what physical literacy is. Quite often I hear from teachers, you're asking me to do 3 different initiatives, plus Fuel Up to Play 60, plus First Lady Michelle Obama's initiative on Let's Move. I think the synergy or integration of those is where we are going to be successful. For example, CISPAPs may be a way for us to achieve physical literacy. It is a time, if we can create more opportunities for children to move, we increase the likelihood that they will increase their motor competence. If they have to sit the rest of the school day after 25 minutes of physical education, they're not going to have enough opportunities to learn or to practice the school. So it's this convergence of these ideas which I think has the greatest potential. It is not a competition between each one of these ideas. The Presidential Youth Fitness Program requires that the school actually become a Let's Move active school and have access to those materials. Another example of the synergy that it might take in this initiative. So in sum, history does repeat itself. And at times we go back to basics. At times we have this emphasis on health-related fitness and exercise as medicine. At times in our history we have moved away from that. This is the time where health is our initiative and the health of our children is our primary reason for us to be here today. Children and adolescents need to be taught by highly qualified teachers who need ongoing, continuous training. As the needs of our children change, as the tools that we use change and evolve, the teachers need to be properly instructed on how to integrate those and maximize the potential of our students. For example, the PYFP and the use of a fitnessgram assessment has this notion for global tracking. And this particular initiative and why it's so powerful is we can be far more responsive in meeting the needs of our young people and, in turn, address potential economic issues that may transcend that. PYFP involves teachers beyond our discipline and those who are not in this room. It also involves families and parents. And that's why I believe that some of these initiatives have great potential because we are involving the home environment and bringing that to the table. And certainly, whether we agree with the term physical literacy or not, it is a desirable outcome for each one of us, and we hope to have our children achieve. I don't know if now is the time for questions, but I would be available for questions throughout the conference, and I thank you so much for your attention.